The MMORPG genre of video games is in a really weird spot. Over the last decade, we've seen countless games from years past shut down, convert their money model to free-to-play, or even get complete overhauls. You can count on less than two hands the amount of MMOs only playable with a monthly subscription these days, and that's wild. From the genre origins with Meridian 59 to the wild early success of Ultima Online and EverQuest, and less popular ones like Asheron's Call and Dark Age of Camelot. With early MMORPGs, it's pretty much a coin toss whether or not it's still up and running, let alone active. Puzzle Pirates, anyone? A vast majority of all MMO-style games, or the games as a service things like your Destinies, Fortnites, or whatever time-consuming flavor of the month, have really embraced the freemium model. You can get in, no problem, but when the wall hits, it really hits. However, there's been two games that haven't deviated from the monthly subscription model who are still standing strong today: World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV. See, there's not even enough standing MMOs like these for me to even make a joke. Like what, A Tale in the Desert and Final Fantasy XI? Also, geez, a ton of people still play 11 despite it being older than WoW. Good on y'all. But the topic of today's video, if you do in fact know how to read, is how Final Fantasy XIV is reviving the MMORPG genre. An entire subset of video games that has been mostly dominated by a single product, and one that is currently in a deep fall from grace, not just in the eyes of the players, but the entire industry.
So yo, it's Austin, and today we're talking about MMORPGs. Now, I've been playing these on and off since I was 10 years old with the original Phantasy Star Online, which for some of you might as well be the beginning of the end. From an EverQuest trial on an AOL sign-up CD to World of Warcraft to just about every free-to-play game you can imagine, I've probably played most and then some. How many hours of my life are lost to dead servers? An indescribable amount. Rest in peace, Wildstar. But before we get to Final Fantasy XIV and the many reductive expansions of World of Warcraft, we need to start with the basics. Are you hungry? Do you need a snack? Well, we can get a snack with today's sponsor, Boxu. This here is Boxu, an authentic snack box that comes straight to your door from Japan. Each one of these has an original assortment of snacks and teas that are curated in a way to make a cool monthly theme, and this one is no different. They're the only Japanese snack box out there that partners with 100-plus-year-old family snack makers, so you know you're getting something authentic. Let's open this bad boy up. So each one of these comes with a cultural guide, which not only tells you what you're getting inside, but also shows you the theme, which in this case was Seasons of Japan. It also shows you where your snacks are from in case you're interested. There's a lot in here, huh?
There sure is, past Austin, such as the stick potato Sapamucho plum, representing spring, the handmade yuzu sake candy, representing summer, the delicious and sweet matcha chocolate stick cake, representing fall, or even the organic genmaicha tea, representing a nice winter day.
This seems like it's some kind of biscuit. It's called the 20th Century Pear Lang de Chat, which I definitely butchered the name of. So this month, Boxu has a special promotion. You can use my code Austin20 to save 20%, and you'll have a chance to win 2 Fandango movie tickets for Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. Terms apply. Use my code Austin20 and don't miss out on this special promo. And of course, some tasty treats. That's free shipping to the States, BT dubs. That's Austin20 to save 20% off your first Boxu crate. And you should, this is good stuff. Thank you guys so much for the sponsor, and now, video games, MMORPGs. A lot of them. A lot of MMOs.
We gotta talk about Final Fantasy XIV 1.0. A very poor game. I'm actually one of the rare players who sunk a decent amount of time into it as well. The proof is on my back. The original incarnation of Final Fantasy XIV, as I'm sure most players and viewers are aware, was a complete disaster. The engine was filled with all sorts of problems, that is, if you could get the game to even run. This thing was a system hog, and just about any remaining footage you can find runs awfully. Let's not forget about the system crashing flower pot. This game had a ton of problems. There's the lack of an auto attack and the awful retainer system in place of an auction house. Yeah, you wanna find some items to buy? Go dig through a hall filled with everyone else's retainers. This is good. Or what about the fatigue system, limiting the amount of XP you could gain per job each week? Of course, there's the game's engine, Crystal Tools just being the worst. The original incarnation of Final Fantasy XIV Online was so bad that remnants of its spaghetti code still affect its most current version, but that's another topic. Basically what I'm saying is Square messed up. Players of the beta and 1.0 versions of the game basically lulled back to Final Fantasy XI, a much better game at the time. That is, of course, if you can beat the play online sign up process. It's much harder than it looks. Many know the story of Yoshi P nuking 1.0 in preparation for its overhaul, A Realm Reborn, by literally nuking the world. It was a story involving a world-ending calamity featuring your boy Bahamut doing his thing from Final Fantasy VII, except, well, no one's getting back up after that. It was an impressive cutscene and end to the servers, and a hopeful start to the reboot of a video game that decided its future was the past by modeling itself after the dominating MMORPG World of Warcraft. So, I had started making this video before all of the absolutely awful accounts started to come to public eye, culminating in the state of California literally suing the company for its abusive culture towards women. As much as I stand against this behavior and will not be supporting Activision Blizzard in any way going forward, WoW is directly correlated to the success of Final Fantasy XIV, so I'll be going over it. To say that World of Warcraft was, and in some cases still is, a cultural phenomenon would be an understatement. At the time of its original release, WoW was considered baby's first MMO due to its incredibly accessible nature. Games at the time like EverQuest, Ragnarok Online, EVE Online, and Star Wars Galaxies, while popular, still had that icky gamer scent on it. You needed to be familiar with a lot of the systems akin with D&D in order to understand stat priorities, and sometimes interfacing with the world was just difficult. World of Warcraft, on the other hand, well, it became the standard bearer for most MMOs moving forward with its UI, and very quickly became one of the most popular video games ever. It became the subject of news reports all over the world. It became a thing that could prevent you from getting a job. Hell, it got one of the more famous South Park episodes. It's not every day that a video game becomes a household name, but WoW sure made it, for better or worse, and it just kept growing. I had originally stopped during NACS and AQ Prog because I may have done poorly in school and got in trouble. Hey, it was 15 years ago, but I popped back on for Wrath of the Lich King to finish Arthas' story that had been set up for so long. Worth?
Is it over?
Nope.
As much fun as I was having in Icecrown Citadel defeating the Lich King over and over, I found it strange that there was really no reason for me to go back and do old content. At level 80, there was no way for me to tackle the level 70 raids besides making a new character and freezing their level like you would for level 19 or 29 PvP. And like, that's a lot of effort for something no one's gonna be doing. I essentially completely missed out on an entire expansion that to this day I know nothing about. Unfortunately, this is the trend we're gonna keep talking about.
But hey, none of that really matters. With Blizzard announcing higher and higher subscription numbers year after year, it became the MMO to play. After all, no one wants to hop on an MMO with dwindling numbers, because to the audience, it seems like the game is dying. It's kind of a rapid chain effect that causes games to die out pretty quickly when people think it's dying, so they don't try it out because they think it's dying, and then it actually dies. And so the concept of the WoW killer was born, a very, very embarrassing period of time.
EverQuest 2 launched around the same time as well, but really failed to capture that audience. But I'll never forget Slash Pizza. Who could? Guild Wars? It was fine. Matrix Online? RIP. Dungeons & Dragons Online? Yeah, they had another one before Neverwinter. It was fine. Richard Garriott's Tabula Rasa closed down a month after going free to play. Warhammer Online? I actually love this game, but I think normies are scared of Warhammer. Rift? Oh, Rift. I rated hardcore in Rift and was the main tank of a guild that had server second on Greenscale. Game was sick, but you know, it died. Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 came out in this time frame, and it was kind of a joke on the MMO scene. Like, people were looking for an alternative to WoW, and people wanted a sequel to Final Fantasy XI. Now, 11 is really interesting here. A lot of people seem to forget it actually came out 2 whole years before World of Warcraft, and it's holding steady as a pay-to-play subscription MMO, one of the only. It has a way less generous trial than 14 too, which is hilarious. I'm not kidding when I say I played everything back then, by the way. I rated in DC Universe, rated in the Tortanic, and I gave up MMOs with Terra because I realized I just wasn't having much fun anymore. WildStar grabbed me for a bit, but ultimately ended up shutting down as well. People would just flock to these games whenever WoW was in a patch cycle and would leave in mass exodus whenever a new patch would come out. So all of these games would just die over and over. Most of, if not all of these games were marketed as, considered, or in some case literally used the word WoW killer in their advertising. And every single single one of them failed. 9 out of 10 times, these games would come up with a neat concept or quality of life improvement, and Blizzard would find a way to do a little yoinky sploinky. Granted, this is a pretty common practice, but sometimes it was pretty blatant. World of Warcraft wanted all of your time, and its in-game mechanics reflected that. As someone who had to grind flasks for his guild for raiding in vanilla, that shit was like a part-time job on top of everything else. And you know what? I loved it. I really did. And so did millions and millions of others, as World of Warcraft completely dominated the MMORPG market for over a decade. Eventually, other companies began to stop trying. 2003 to 2011 saw the release of countless games every year, all trying to grab the bag. While a lot of them have bits and pieces of success here and there, especially in countries like China or Korea where the revenue models are different, Blizzard held firmly on top. In the last few years, the competition's kind of petered out. Granted, a lot of the older games are continuing to support their customers, but a lot of those games are just releasing yearly expansions and no one's coming out with a huge concept or a killer. Clearly, this is all because Firefall failed, right? Well, sometime after World of Warcraft's third expansion, Cataclysm, launched, the numbers began to trickle down. Prior to this, the numbers were on the up and up, but something happened. Was it Final Fantasy XIV? Absolutely not. But sometime in 2015, Activision decided they were no longer going to report the amount of paid subscribers WoW had. It's never a good sign. Well, I have a theory as to what the problem could be. Over time, MMORPGs have kind of become notorious as games that have no respect for the player's time. And it's been that way for a very long time. It's not even exclusively a World of Warcraft problem. Let's not forget about Absolute Virtue from Final Fantasy XI. This boss wasn't able to be beaten after 18 hours of trying, causing several of the people attempting it to vomit. That's always fun, huh? What about Warcraft's Scarab Lords? Sure, it's neat and something that could only be done at a certain period of time, and it's kind of cool, but oh, the numbers are absurd. This kind of content really drove up a stigma to the genre, and if you were gonna play an MMO, that was going to be the only game you played. And unfortunately, it did exactly that for me. During my time with vanilla, I completely missed so many classic PS2 RPGs, some of which I still haven't played to this day. I'll play Suikoden 5 one day, I swear. But with so many excellent video games coming out and all of them wanting more of your time, World of Warcraft's competition became not just other MMOs, but every other video game out there. The dominating popular genre shifts every few years, and in the 2010s, MMOs just weren't it anymore. First-person shooters were everywhere, then MOBAs took the center stage, and nowadays Battle Royales are up with MOBAs side by side. MMORPGs do still clearly have a market at this point, but it is diminishing.
Wow, thank you.
We'll come back to the current state of Warcraft as Blizzard's in a bit of a hot spot at the moment, but for now, I want to focus on the rise of Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn, a game that many, myself included, were skeptical of. The initial concept of WoW, but now it's Final Fantasy, was a huge turnoff for a lot of people. While it was busted, both Final Fantasy XIV 1.0 and Final Fantasy XI had a unique style of playing that wasn't just your typical tab target MMORPG. Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn launched in 2013 to a decent amount of hype and a lot of bit of weariness, considering the name was pretty damaged at this point. This came out during the Mists of Pandaria expansion of WoW, one that wasn't quite up to player expectations. ARR is a game that I played briefly, but it kind of failed to hold my attention due to the fact that I was just kind of out of the genre at this point. The general consensus? It's better than 1.0. Yay, you did the bare minimum. A Realm Reborn is a game that made the best out of a bad situation, tried to mirror what seemed to be working, and created a community that was a nice alternative with a name strong enough not to die after a month. Sure, you'll still have the occasional 1.0 fanatic, people who have a fortitude for punishment, but that's like 12 people who say things like Kino unironically.
Nightmare.
1.0 was a massive open world experience like your World of Warcrafts, while A Realm Reborn really scaled things back to make good on the promise of launching on the PlayStation 3, which in retrospect sounds like it would play terribly. That meant massive zones would be split up into smaller instanced areas, maps would have load times between them, and you would no longer have to navigate the nightmare known as the Black Shroud. 1.0 had a more open-ended approach to gameplay and the way the story worked, but with A Realm Reborn, Square decided that they were going to put the primary focus on the story. Really an unusual move for an MMO, but this one seemed to be an evolution of the way 11 worked. Instead, this time, every area, dungeon, class, unlockable activity, and 99% of the items you gain access to would be locked behind some sort of quest. The dreaded main story scenario, or MSQ. At this point in time, stories in MMORPGs were more of a background thing. You could level 1 to 80 in Wrath of the Lich King and have no idea as to anything happening with any of the characters in the game due to the way storytelling worked. Your character was, at that time, a cog in the machine, a soldier for fighting. In Final Fantasy XIV, they really embraced the franchise-old concept of the Warrior of Light, dating itself all the way back to 1987 with the original Final Fantasy. Now, you're probably asking yourself, why would they make the playable character in the game meant for millions to be playing together the Chosen One? And that's a really valid question. And to that, I say it's actually explained, but it may or may not make sense and may or may not be part of the story, so we're not going to talk about it. Well, another day, that's fine. The story of A Realm Reborn plays out like any old adventure. You are, in fact, a jobber at the beginning. You're literally picking dirt up off the ground and trying to live your life. It's like real life, but you're way hotter, debatably. Or you're a cat, I don't know. But eventually you stop picking up sticks, and here's where A Realm Reborn becomes the Great Divide. Through hours and hours of world building, you get the introduction of a three-way political conflict, hundreds of years of warring factions, and the ongoing threat of the Primals and Garlean Empire. At the time, A Realm Reborn's story wasn't held in high regard. There's a ridiculous amount of fetch quests. You spend a lot of time doing random things for people you didn't really know. For example, Alphinaud. In 2021, completely caught up on everything. I love this character, but playing this story for the first time, it's like, who's this little idiot? Get him out of here. Him and his sister Alice filled the trope of the magical twins, seen not just in Final Fantasy, but tons of other JRPGs, and all I can think about is infinite undiscovery. Dinner, 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 dinner. As for the gameplay, well, people seem to be okay with it. Since Mists and Draenor were turnoffs for a lot of people, Final Fantasy XIV had a nice boost of players come in and try out the hardcore raiding scene, which also meant that you had a ton of people come in, skip every bit of dialogue, and raid. Not that I blame them. In-game looting and gearing systems were time-consuming, not really interested in the player's time. Relics, for one, even in 2021, when you can farm it at level 80, still take forever. But as someone who did raid in 2 different instances in World of Warcraft, watching video guides and clips of people doing extreme trials and the coils of Bahamut raids in 14 was mind-blowing. This was way more difficult than anything I'd done in WoW. Hell, in Wrath, I just played a mage, which meant I just mashed Arcane Blast over and over until deep vein thrombosis set in. Stand up sometimes, it's fine. So to see a group of 8 people doing the dance, being able to resurrect in combat while having to manage so many buttons was crazy to me. Too bad I said no MMOs, and honestly at the time, A Realm Reborn might not have been for me. The multi-classing systems, while neat, were very obfuscated and led to a lot of elitism. Extreme trial groups were easy to get going, but the rage quit wasn't very uncommon. And frankly, the game lacked a true Final Fantasy vision. Sure, you had some good ass music, the Final Fantasy visual style, the chocobos and the da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na, but the narrative wasn't quite at that JRPG level yet. It was closer to being just another one of the many theme park MMORPGs that crashed and burned. That is, of course, until Heavensward.
Final Fantasy XIV Heavensward was the first time in a long time that I saw an MMO without the words war and craft in the title get itself a big expansion. Something you could physically hold, something with huge press events and media tours. Expansions have been a huge part of MMORPGs for a long time, and even games like EverQuest have kind of stopped doing the physical release. However, when Heavensward was announced and they showed a bunch of cool looking dragoons raining down from the sky, I think a lot of people noticed.
I think a lot of people know the meme at this point. You should try the free trial of Final Fantasy XIV, blah blah blah, critically acclaimed expansion, Heavensward, blah blah blah. Yo, wait, is that Hikuleo? Yo, too bad it wasn't my sign from the same night. Balan Wonderworld is okay. See, John Moxley saw it, he knows. The critically acclaimed part isn't a joke, by the way. I feel like Final Fantasy XIV fans do a good job of spreading the good word of their game, but holy hell are we annoying. But Heavensward is really good. The end of A Realm Reborn started to spotlight more individual character moments, focusing on the Scions who comprise most of the main cast to this day. Suddenly, in the middle of patch content, Naoki Yoshida's team decided to build the narrative up, involve the player character a lot more, and actually give us stakes and in some cases loss. 14 went from being something to experience mechanically into something to experience emotionally. Other MMORPGs at the time, with the exception of Star Wars: The Old Republic, just weren't doing this. In an MMORPG like World of Warcraft, Rift, or any number one of these types of games, the main character is the world you're in. The drama you experience in the world are the character interactions you have. You're just another minion of the Horde, the Alliance, the Jedi, or whatever the hell you do in Elder Scrolls Online. But in Heaven's Ward, you're already the Warrior of Light. You're a decorated hero that people are now calling on to assist with not just petty squabbles and collecting cactus fruit, but to slay a crazed dragon and hopefully put an end to the war that's lasted for ages. It's a little bigger than, say, being a guy helping someone else kill somebody. Alongside a whole new story, the length of a full-sized normal JRPG, were a ton of player quality life improvements, 3 new classes, and, well, countless other things to talk about. And you were still able to play the old content as intended. Final Fantasy XIV has always done a little thing where you can sink down your item level and experience any of the instanced fights in the game in its intended fashion, even if it's slightly different. It even removes your abilities and makes it so you fight at that level. And while things have changed, such as the existence of TP or several abilities being completely removed from the game, it works itself out in a way that made just about every piece of content in the entire game accessible to all players, provided they watch the story and unlock it. Which you should, it's usually pretty good. That also means that every piece of content in this game has some lore or story reason for existing, meaning that you don't just stumble into a random dungeon because you hit the required level. Even something as old and easy as 14's first dungeon, Sastasha, is always relevant due to the way that roulettes and leveling work. And that's really cool. It means that you'll probably be able to find a group for anything this game has to offer at any time. Well, unless you're solo queuing as DPS for a 24-man raid at 3 in the morning. Please go to sleep.
And well, this is a journey that keeps going on and on until today. Now, while the next expansion, Stormblood, wasn't anywhere near as critically acclaimed, the follow-up to that, Shadowbringers, kind of launched things into the stratosphere, and it's all people talk about these days. And Shadowbringers became one of the highest reviewed Final Fantasies, which is nuts. One of the things that's made 14 so popular is its accessibility, and I think being on console has a lot to do with that. It's the only major pay-to-play MMO on consoles on the market, and I think that makes up a huge chunk of the game's population. That, and I just love being able to play the game with a controller. Hell, I play on PC with a controller because it just feels right. I think being the huge premier console MMORPG has a lot to do with it, and now that Endwalker's coming out in like 4 months and it's also crazy hyped, it's just gonna keep going up. I mean, heck, the game's gotten so popular lately that they had to stop selling keys online on their official website. That doesn't happen, and I think you could say they earned it. I certainly think that they did. But at the moment, countless players are leaving another MMORPG in mass amounts, and we need to talk about why.
It's really weird to see Titans fall, but I guess it happens to everyone, huh? At the moment of this writing, World of Warcraft has 3 SKUs: Classic, the Burning Crusade Classic, and Retail, which just refers to the latest expansion. If you wanted to, you could use your monthly sub to play on a server and experience the game as it was in its older states from 2004 and 2007. Now, this isn't a new idea. EverQuest actually did it first in 2015 with a server that allowed players to vote on whether or not to progress to a different expansion. Heck, even Rift tried it with Rift Prime, but that game was never going to have something that lasted. Rest in peace, Rift. But considering Warcraft has had countless private classic servers for literally over a decade, it's a wonder they didn't do it sooner. Oh, it's probably because they thought you were wrong.
You think you do, but you don't.
And these classic servers got way more buzz than the expansion of Retail at the time, Battle for Azeroth. World of Warcraft has really changed the way it does things. I can't speak much on BFA, but for the sake of this video, prior to any of the lawsuit information coming to the surface, I bought Shadowlands to give it a try. I saw all the people leaving this game. I saw my data center and server in 14 being flooded with all these sprouts. I had to know why everyone was leaving, why were huge Warcraft streamers flipping at teams, if you would. would. Sidebar, there's been this 14 WoW rivalry for years now. I guess because they're both in the same space, just one has pandas and the other cat girls. Apparently they hate each other, but that thought process is for petulant basement dwellers who attach their identity to a consumer product made by a corporation. Moving on. So, Shadowlands. On a fresh character, a Destruction Spect Warlock, I went from starting the game to running a raid finder version of the latest raid, Chains of Domination, in about 30 hours. That is really short. I got a bit to say, but the short of it is this. World of Warcraft is now Diablo. It's no longer a game that wants you to take your time and explore. It doesn't want you to look at the old world, it wants you to sit in one of 3 areas and do dailies. Shadowlands doesn't want you to have unique interactions with people in the world. It doesn't want you to even participate in world PvP anymore. It wants you to get up and on the content and gear treadmill. It wants you to log in every single day to stay relevant, and it wants to drip feed you things to do until you buy the next Blizzard product. I know that's harsh, but World of Warcraft now feels less like an adventure or world to live in and more of a lobby. One with a small amount of queuable dungeons worth anything and enough slurs in chat to reach a lifetime's quota. Look, I don't want to bash on World of Warcraft because I do think they do a lot of stuff really well. The way glamours or transmogs work in retail is great. You collect an item, you'll have access to use it for any future glams you want to make, unless it's on another class, in which case, off. The raid dungeons are visually designed in a top tier manner and the game feels really snappy to play, but the only things to do in that game are raiding content or PvP. There's not much for a casual player to experience, especially not one who enjoys the more adventurous aspects of these games. You'll either grind for gear, grind for a costume, grind out your covenant, or grind for a mount. That's it. Do the quest, raise the rep, turn in the item, get reward. One of the cool things that Vanilla WoW did was make you feel like you were part of something bigger. The progression was slow, and raids required practice and research. Not today, because everything is theory crafted out and written on a wiki page, but at the time, it was a journey. You could have crazy moments with other players in the overworld, and that's something that 14 is lacking. But retail sets things up in a way to where you're gathering like 12 different currencies that all work together to make number go up. The narrative, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, is currently infuriating a lot of Warcraft's long-term player base, and it seems like the game is in autopilot. And unfortunately, with all of the news coming out with the lawsuit, general employee conditions, and Activision's lack of care for the integrity of their franchises, I guess that makes sense. There's a lot of care in a lot of aspects of the game, especially visually, but the respect of player time and money sure isn't one of them. Heck, even the relaunch of one of their biggest products ever, the Burning Crusade Classic, was marred by microtransactions. Microtransactions in a game years before those were even commonplace. It's shameless. Maybe this is weird, but I was shocked to find out that I couldn't play old content as intended in retail World of Warcraft. I'd stepped away for years and have been playing 14, where I can do just about anything that game has to offer with any class, anytime. But with the way Shadowlands is, 95% of, maybe even more of the world is completely barren. Content that just sits there completely inaccessible to normal play. They've added time walking as a concept to experience old stuff, but it's relegated to weekly events for one expansion for some reason. It seems like Blizzard wants to throw away all the old stuff, focus on the new, and walk away, because who cares about the old crusty games anymore, am I right? Just give them their own server and charge 40 for a level skip. But ultimately, that means raids like Firelands, Icecrown Citadel, and hey, eventually the newest, Sanctum of Domination, will become a barren land that no one touches. Something you might run by yourself or with a friend once a week in order to try to get a glam piece, but will never get to experience as intended again.
Well, that was depressing. I think it's clear as day why people are finally trying out the competitor's product. The only way to experience a plethora of 17 years worth of content is to find a private server or go classic, which it's baffling to me. But now things come back around to the stigma I was talking about. If you were to ask me 2 years ago what I thought about MMORPGs, I would have described them as time wasters, or exactly what the stigma implied, especially on the free-to-play side of things. However, Final Fantasy XIV is, and it sounds a little cheesy, currently breaking down that stigma and inviting all kinds of players in its doors. I mean, literally just now a friend sent me a DM saying that they stumbled into an RP fight pit arena. Can't write that.
In Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers, patch-relevant gear has typically one currency you gotta worry about. You can go into the new raids at a relatively low gear level, and you can go into Savage or even much more challenging versions of it without much of a grind either. In fact, there's a set of easily attainable crafted gear that'll get you exactly where you need to be. Hell, you don't even have to raid if you don't want to. You can do the normal version one time for the story, the clear, and then go vibe with some friends in the digital world, and then get scared and run away. This game is much more suitable for the player who's a fan of cozy content, for someone who wants to be a cool avatar in a cool digital world. You can spend entire days learning about the crafting and gathering systems, each of which play with a specific rotation of abilities as well. It's not just collect and click the button, it's a puzzle minigame in its own right. Maybe you want to chill in the gold saucer, play a bunch of minigames and meet other players, play a couple rounds of Triple Triad, which, by the way, is still the best Final Fantasy card game. Or if you do like raiding, you have multiple difficulties. There's normal, extreme, savage, and ultimate, all of which don't make you spend a bunch of time clearing large dungeons of trash mobs or corpse running every time you die. When you die, it's like, oh, I'm down. Just reset all my cooldowns, let's go. Maybe you're feeling nostalgic and want to try an older fight. You can just hop in there. Probably has a cool mount for you. Some of the trials have amazing moments, and I'm glad that we'll never have to worry about Susano or Cruise Chaser being unavailable due to being old. You can really tell that the 14 team respects their legacy content and is interested in building a huge cohesive experience as opposed to making a quick buck here and there. Heck, Yoshida's gone on record several times basically saying that you should go off and play other games from time to time. Like, hey, unsub, come back when we had patches, it's fine. Since he was someone that played World of Warcraft back in the day, you can tell he wants deeply for breathing space to be a part of the experience. I haven't even touched on the quality of the story yet, and it's hard to describe it in one go, but they've really outdone themselves. While they do have a team of writers doing different aspects of the game, the latest expansion was done by Natsuko Ishikawa, a woman who could write her way out of hell if necessary. I want to cover the entire story so far before Endwalker comes out, so expect that from me sometime in the next few months, but despite my own reservations, 14 has ended up being one of my favorite Final Fantasy stories ever, and I'm a fanboy, that's saying a lot. Staying relevant in 14 isn't very difficult or even important, and the game's harder content is challenging enough to make it an experience that relies more on skill than gear checks, and I think that's important. By not erasing old content, having a massive free trial, and a lot of things for non-gamers to do, you can really see why this thing's been growing like crazy lately. And that's not to say it's without issues, because they're there, and I'm fair. The server tick rate is really bad and leads to some untimely deaths. Some boss mechanics can be really confusing to understand. The amount of particle effects on screen is extremely overwhelming and will completely ruin your experience unless you turn it down. As with every online game, a lot of players can be elitist, though the 14 community is better than most. The story takes a while to get started, your combat job feels really bare bones until level 50, and the interface really needs an overhaul because navigating menus has its own learning curve, but it's come such a long way. It's insane to me that Shadowbringers came from Final Fantasy XIV, the game that was a joke. But here we are, potentially a few days away from the industry leader changing. Even prior to the awful events at Blizzard coming to light, this change was happening, and now it's hard to see WoW making this full comeback. I wish it wasn't the case, because competition is healthy, and if both games were swinging full force, it would be amazing, but Activision Blizzard needs to make a lot of internal changes before we'll see that happen. MMORPGs are a genre that can only have a few games in the spotlight at the same time, but weirdly enough, we've had a bunch of new ones pop up recently. There's New World, Lost Ark, Ashes of Creation, the reboot of Phantasy Star Online 2. All of these games are seemingly following a different path than the time-consuming grindfest that the genre used to be. Yo, anyone want to go kill mobs in the dunes for 5 hours? Gain like a level or two? Anyone?
I think Final Fantasy XIV is currently paving the way for a new type of MMORPG that doesn't need all of your time, and you don't need to log in every single day just to watch a little minuscule number go up. And I'm happy that I was proven wrong. On a more serious note, here's hoping that Activision and the entire gaming industry can pull themselves together and become a place where women are treated as equals and co-workers and not just harassed for their existence. I've went ahead and included a link down in the description to a charity that I like, so make sure to check that out if you want to support a good cause. And if you want to play Final Fantasy XIV with me, I'm on Excalibur on the Primal Data Center, and I'll be doing a New Game Plus run of all of the game's story content in preparation for my story lore videos. I'll be needing some brave soldiers for my minimum eye level no echo runs of stupid hard content, and you guys will be able to sit there and laugh at me as I pull a gray parse. Actually, no, I'm like a purple boy, it's good. I swear. Anyways, I'm Austin, and join me next time when I cover a video game that won't get the video demonetized.
Thanks so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, GM Pinks, Nick Irving, Zach Porter, P-Funk, Ryan Talbert, Kevin Zanowski, Jordy McCaffrey, Karen Arter, Brandon Howell, Chris Shelton, David Molnar, Irrational, Donnan, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Christopher Olivia, DX Buster, and Legend Gary. Thank you all so much for your continued support. So guess who thought that they had a pop filter for like 7 years, but it turns out it was a windscreen and now has a pop filter. It's your boy. I'm a professional. I know what I'm doing. Thank you. Keep watching my videos, please. And I'm gonna be streaming on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/Austin Eruption. Some Final Fantasy and also some other stuff that'll be a nice surprise. You know, sleep tight. Hello, YouTube.